Please be seated. Anyone with mobile phones, I've got them turned on. Please either put them on silent or turn them off, please. My name's Ross Britton. I've been asked to say a few words and Firstly, I'd like to welcome you all, everyone, to this celebration of the life of Colin, or as he is affectionately known, Dump, husband of Maureen, father of Brendan, and stepfather of Per, Martin and Sue. His brother of Tony, Johnny deceased, Jan, Paul deceased, and their families. Dump idolised his wife and family. Dump, well, what can one say? Where did one start? He was a gentle giant, loved by all who knew him. He always kept in touch with all his family and friends, no matter where they were or what they were doing. Dump had a nickname for just about everybody he knew. I will leave it up to others to elaborate more on nicknames that everybody knows they've been given by Dump. Dump passed away doing what he loved, and that was building. At 77 years of age, this is quite a feat, as he never shirked an issue. His work ethic was amazing for a guy his age. He was amazing in the last week of his life. He poured over 200 cubic metres of concrete. His biggest day was 105 cubic metres, which is 21 big loads of dolomite trucks, which is a monumental effort. The special highlight of Dump's life was the annual Anzac March, where he would play the drum with the other people who participated. He'd start in Smithton, then he'd travel to Stanley, and finally down to Marrawar. After he finished at Marrawar, he would end up at his Arthur River shack, so that he didn't have to drive back to Smithton, so avoiding the police. Wednesday nights at the big club started many, many years ago as a meeting night for the off-road group, led by the late Saltwater and Carl Schramm. These nights, or I should say meetings, would go for quite some time. Over the years, the numbers dwindled, and it ended up just a few of us meeting for a quiet drink. We could not stay after 6:45 because Dump had to get home to watch Home and Away. He couldn't miss it. In the early days, Dump had to do a renovation for Britton Swamp to their offices. I think it was Bill Schramm working with him at the time, and Dump needed a 12x2 or a 300 by 50, 2 lengths, 13 foot long or 3.9. So out in the yard he went and found a big plank, got his tape out, measured it, just what he needed. He could get 2 13-foot lengths out of it. It turned out that that piece of timber was a very, very highly prized piece of celery top pine, boat grade, that took Britons quite some time to source, and Dump had just cut it in half. So Britons weren't all that happy with him, as to get a celery top pine that big and that long to cut the perfect length of timber was very rare. Dump's reaction was, they're still growing. And those 2 planks are still in our offices today. But another time, Dump was at Tagari working, building dairy. It's like he built quite a few dairies, and I think it was Peter McBain who was working with him at the time there. They did all the hard work, put the shutters in place, poured the concrete, and home they went. Next morning, they stripped the shutters and realised that he hadn't left a doorway for the cows to get out. So it was all go to cut a doorway in before the concrete set too hard. Dump swore Peter to silence, not to say anything. An hour after getting back to Smithton, all Dump's mates knew. Peter couldn't keep it to himself. Dump had a very great passion for trains, especially steam trains. He would travel wherever, and whenever he had the opportunity to travel on one of these, he was ecstatic. He just loved them. And I bet he always told me he had many, many books up at his house, which he would read, and he'd let everybody know that he had them. So he really enjoyed those steam trains. Dump was one of a kind. He could not see anyone in trouble or stuck. If you had a problem, he was the first one to put his hand up, to be there to give a hand or to lend you whatever you required. He was a real gentleman. Dump in later years was reluctant to travel. Getting past the Stanley turn-off was a major battle. Then if he got to the sisters, we all told him he required a passport. That's enough for me from now, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Tony for the eulogy. Thank you, Tony.
I've got a pretty good memory, but I better refer to the notes in case. Anyway, hello everybody and welcome, and thank you for being here to celebrate the life of Dump. I'd like to extend my sincere condolences to Maureen, Brendan, Sue, Thea, Martin and their families, as I know they'll all miss him very dearly. Now Dump, or Colin Stephen, was born to Vic and Rita on the 23rd of February 43, the first born of 5 children. He was the first grandchild in both the Jaeger and the Tom Gray families. In the early years, our father was not only sorting at the Salmon River Mill, but also did a lot of land clearing in the Maribor district, and hence the family spent a lot of time at Maribor. Our grandfather Gray reckoned the dump was like a little dumpling, and that stuck, hence the name Dump evolved. Between the Tom Gray family and the Bun Gray family, who lived close to each other, Dump was taught how to be cheeky and a bit naughty, and he was about 3 or 4. They reckon he called old Harry Parsons, one of the old locals, a shitty-arsed old bastard. So that would give you, many of you, an insight into Dump's character that you knew so well. I'm only repeating what I heard, Warren. Growing up in Smithton had its moments, and myself and Johnny were often on the receiving end of Dump's antics. He could be cheeky to Mum and Dad, and he especially loved to torment Mum Gray, who lived next door to us in her twilight years. I could digress here and tell a lot of stories, but once started, it'd be hard to stop. I wrote here, you'll have to wait for the book to come out, but I think I will tell one or two. But I'd like to just tell you a little story about my 3 other brothers. They're all involved in this little story. But Johnny had bought a new boat, and it was a fairly big boat, and it had weighed all up with the trailer about 5 tonne. He didn't have any brakes. He had brakes on the trailer, but didn't have a way of activating. So he set that up with the compressor and around the 3 of them around it at Johnny's to try her out. So it's a fairly steep driveway, as most of you know, and so Dump's sitting up in the captain's chair in the boat, Paul standing around like a borrowed dog, and Johnny's driving the Toyota. So he takes up off the laneway, and when we dipped into the crossing onto the street, the trailer popped off the board. Now Johnny was renowned for having a fat wallet, and I don't know whether the business cards didn't draw money, but it was fat. And when it popped off, he had this hand lever like a log truck has on the steering column, and he whacked the brake on. Dump says, I was looking to see what I could do. I was looking where I could steer it back down the driveway, because if you went through the shed, you'd have launched out into mid-air, because it's a pretty big drop below. So he was wondering how he was going to navigate that. And next thing Johnny yells out, chuck something under the wheel. Paul replies, throw us your wallet. Now, as Ross mentioned, and I've got to repeat it, Dump's great passions in life was his interest in trains and military vehicles. And he always wanted to be a train driver, but that never eventuated. But his interest in trains never waned, and he went on quite a few train trips during his life. As boys growing up, we all spent a lot of time during school holidays on the farm at Marrawar, and their lives were also shaped by the Jaeger family with their skills in sawmilling, joinery, and cabinet making, as well as boats and fishing. Dump was never interested in sawmilling or going to sea, but he did love his trips down the west coast fishing, camping, and exploring that area. Dump attended the Smithton Primary and High Schools, where he achieved well and made some lifelong friends, and I'll leave this to Ross Hine to expand on that part of Dump's life. He began his working life, I think it was in 1959, as an apprentice carpenter joiner with local builder Worrell Vertigan, and went on to making this his lifelong profession. Dump joined forces with Freddie Armstrong, and they started out on their own somewhere in the mid-1960s. I remember our dad saying that Dump was earning more than him with an hourly rate of £2 or $4 in today's money. Dump and his lifelong friend Glenn Britton did a trip to the mainland in the 1960s, somewhere around there, and he and Maureen had done several trips since, travelling parts of the outback with other friends, and I'm sure Maureen will have some fond memories of that time. He and Maureen also did some overseas travel, which included holidays in New Zealand and North America, to name a couple. Now, our father was a bit musical and had a squeeze box, which both Dump and I learned to play, and quite often when we had visitors, Dad would get us out of bed, have us play a few tunes to entertain the visitors, and then send us back to bed, and our job was done. Dump used to drive us mad when sitting down for a meal, and he would turn a plate over and tap away with a couple of knives. But that led on to a lifetime of playing drums, firstly in the Circlehead Municipal Band, and also playing drums in local dance bands. All four boys in the family were members of the Circlehead Municipal Band, and they were great times. Many of you, as Ross alluded to, Dump and the Humphreys boys have continued to lead Anzac Day parades after the band folded, and for many years this has gone on, and hopefully this legacy will be carried on in the future. Dump was among the best side drummers I've witnessed. He was also fascinated with the saxophone, so he ended up buying one and taught himself to play. His love of the West Coast saw he and Maureen build their own shack at the Arthur River, and he and Maureen spent much of their leisure time at the river, where they enjoyed socialising with many other shack owners and roaming the beaches and tracks of that area. There were times when Maureen was unable to go to the shack, so Dump would go on his own, and I even had the privilege of several weekends with him. Over the years, Dump has built a few homes, dairies, pigsties, hay barns, you name it, around the Circlehead district. He was great at concreting and built quite a few pieces of equipment and gadgets over the years to make the job easier and more efficient, way before we had pre-mixed concrete services. When a customer employed Dump to do a job, they knew they got the lot, as he had all the equipment and tools to see the job through. Now, just digress here for a moment. I've got a little note here to tell another little yarn. The Dump hated Cascade Blue with a vengeance. And one weekend I went up there and I took a couple of cartons, and he said, "You can take that shit home," he said. I said, "Well, I'll drink some of it." Anyway, got through that weekend, and then he was coming down to help me do a job. And I said, "Don't go bringing any beer with it, I'll have it here." He said, "None of that bloody blue shit." I said, "No, got a carton of Bogues." So during that week, I emptied out 6 stubbies of blue, a drank of mine, and I topped them up with Bogues. Dump arrived, said, "Like a beer, as long as it's the right stuff." Yeah, I said, "I've got some Bogues here for you, good." So he sat down to his Bogues and I sat down to the Cascade Blue. Anyway, I said, "How's the beer going?" "Oh, beautiful stuff." So when he drank the 6 of them, I told him what he'd drink. Well, you can imagine what he called me. He knew most of the people around town, and no one escaped the good-natured stirring that he was renowned for. Dump was also a bit of a Murphy's dog, I might add. He loved dishing it out, but didn't always like when the boot was on the other foot. But I must admit that over time he mellowed and took it all in good fun. He had a very generous nature and was always there to help out when the need arose. And I remember one time when Glenn Britton and I were doing the boat and some visitors came and they said, Dump was there and they said, what do you do? He said, I just lend him the tools. Dump has become an icon in Smithton and surrounding areas, always well known and revered by many people. He loved his job and he drew a lot of satisfaction from it, and it was also his social outlet. Dump loved to tell stories about some of his clients and working partner Warwick, and I guess you've all heard a fair bit of that over the time. Dump couldn't retire, as this was what kept him going. He was true to the end and died with his nose. His legacy and stories about him will live on for some time to come. Rest in peace, Dump, old fella. You certainly earned the right and you deserve it. Now, just before I finish right off, this is old Kevin Regan gave me this yesterday to read out for him. And Dump, Colin Stephen Jaeger, another legend of the West Coast gone. Our drummer boy for Anzac Day, no more light lunches Anzac Day, no more sing-alongs with the squeeze box, no more cook-ups, especially white-baked patties and mutton birds, no more stories, no more Guinness stout. Our love to Maud, Tony, Brendan, Boots and all the family. We're going to miss you, Dumpy. Love from Regan, Julie and family. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tony. I think that certainly sums up Dump fairly well, but there's still one or two more who've got a few things to say, so I'd like to call Ross Hine.
I extend my deepest sympathy to you, Maureen, and all the family in the passing of Dump. He rang me on Sunday before he passed away. We would quite often ring each other for yarn and check on each other's well-being. Thinking about going down the shack for a few days. Might come out for a beer on Thursday night. I said, that's great, mate. Give me a call if you go down. I'll come down on Wednesday afternoon for a yarn. Dump and I went through Smithton High School together, and we forged a friendship that lasted forever. He was a fortnight older than me, and he would always say he knew more than I did because he was older. We would call each other on our birthdays and laugh and joke about getting old and what we couldn't do like we used to. He would also joke that he taught me everything I know, and when I questioned him on that, he reckoned I used to cheat off his exam papers. During the school holidays, he would spend time with his uncles Ray and Steve on the farm at Marrawar, and those times were special to him. And he'd quite often talk about those times of raking hay, grass harrying, and carting hay. He loved the tractor driving and the freedom of the farm and its humour, because his uncles are always acting a fool and tormenting him. Dump loved the humorous side of life, and he would always have a story to tell of the funny times at work or the fun saying of his workmates. And over the years, Dump, along with his workers, did quite a bit of construction work for us on the farm, which included stockyards and a barn and a bridge. And although the workplace would be full of banter and bullshit and stirring, it was also a hive of activity, His Dump's work ethic kept us all on our toes. Hold this pipe so I can weld it. Get the level out of the trailer. Grab the end of the tape. And if you're stuffed up, he would call you all the use of so-and-so's he could think of. He loved his work and his workmates, always speaking highly of those that worked with him, even though sometimes on the job he would take the mickey out of them. And if you talk retirement to him, he would totally reject it, saying, bloody man has got to do something to do, and I enjoy what I do, and otherwise I wouldn't bloody do it. And as mentioned, he loved the peacefulness of his time spent at his shack at the Arthur River and the friendship of his neighbours. I'm sure this time allowed him to rest and recharge for the challenge of the next job. And some of the projects he took on over the years were huge, and he needed time to think and plan them out. Dump was a hard worker and also a deep thinker, which allowed him to accomplish those big jobs over the years. So rest in peace, Dump, and thank you for being a great friend.
Thanks very much, Ross. And now I'd like to introduce Craig to come forward.
Thanks, Ross. I've got a couple of things here that have already been mentioned, so I'll just rush over that. But Uncle Dump, he was that uncle who loved to torment us. As kids, we knew if Dump was around, he'd be up for a stir. Like Ross mentioned, like Uncle Tony mentioned, he didn't always like it when we stirred him back. He'd just turn around and get serious and go, stop being a cheeky little bugger, or something like that. And Mum was Dump's only sister. She was 11 years younger than Dump. And he used to tell me, you know, your hearties aren't any good. I tried to get rid of your father, you know, but he kept coming back. And he also used to say every now and then, your mum's the only decent hearty amongst us, you know, because she's not a real one. He meant it in all good fun, but he was a character. Like Ross mentioned, everyone got a nickname, and us kids weren't any different. I think I had Wally before I even left hospital. It was after great uncle Wally Jaeger. But many of us kids, many other kids got it as well. Price had little baby Wingnut. There was a little fat Maxie. Love Me Boots. By G Bradley. There was many more. And if he didn't have one, he'd make one up. All Mum's brothers were very skilled at their professions. So I was very lucky growing up. Having this around me. Dump did many jobs for Mum and Dad over the years. Do many building jobs, and I was able to be a part of quite a lot when I sat down to think about it. I remember one job he did for Mum and Dad years ago at home, their house at Stanley. Dad, I think, was away fishing. It was Brad and I. We were only young, and the floor in the entrance of the house was the house is on stilts and it's got a yellow tongue floor. And when the house was built, there must have been a slight leak in the sliding door, and all the flooring had got soft. And Dump's profession was loved his concrete, so he said to Mum, we'll cut that out, we'll pour a slab. So Brad and I got the job of pulling all the rotten flooring up, which left the beams. And Dump, with his chainsaw, come in like he did, and fired her up inside, little chainsaw, and there's smoke going everywhere. And he's got this saw in one hand, and he's chopping these beams off. Well, he chopped the one out from underneath himself, what he was standing on. And he went flying backwards, and the saw went up in the air. She was his finger was pressing on the throttle at full tilt, and all we could do was laugh at him. And it hurt him a little bit. He had a bit of blood coming off his ear. Anyway, he brushed that off. And through my teens, I was lucky enough. I spent many a weekend with Uncle Dump at his shack at Arthur River. We'd spend the weekends riding between visiting other people at their shacks up and down the coast, and having the odd beer. And he Dump often would give me advice on these trips on girls and the birds and the bees. I don't know whether that advice is all that good when I look back at it. But he was always a really, really good fun to be around. And he was a terrific man. And he's going to be missed by a lot of people. And he was a big part of my life. And I'm going to miss him a lot. And I'm very grateful for that. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. I'd now like to introduce Malcolm Brown to give an insight of Dump's life.
Thank you, Ross. Prayers and thoughts to Maureen and the Jaeger family. I'm honoured today to be asked to share a few memories of Colin Jaeger, Dump. Dump had nicknames for most people, and I was known to Dump as Porridge. But when Dump started working with Warwick Tyson, that became Powidge. Every time we caught up, he would greet with a great, loud, Powidge. My earliest memories of Dump was when I was a young boy at Tagari. We was working on my parents' family farm. I was about 4 years old. Dump would give me the nails and a hammer to play with just to get out of the way. I don't really remember it, but Dump reminded me a couple hundred times about it, but we still had a laugh about it. I left school in 1989, starting working at Roberts Limited. We worked with Dump renovating dairies. Never a dull moment on the work site. A bit of yelling, quite a few yarns, and a fair bit more yelling. Dump was not happy unless he was knee-deep in concrete. He actually gave himself the self-title of the concreteologist. I remember a time many years ago, Dump had a vibrating concrete screed fitted with a steel whippersnipper. And Dump's whippersnipper had blown up. And for some reason, he knew that I had one, the very same model that would fit. So he rang and rang and rang till I finally answered the phone. And then he come on to me for not answering the phone. I said, Dump, I've been pretty busy. I said, I've had 500 people in front of you. So when we done the deal and Dump drove away with the whippersnipper. When I got home the next night, on my front doorstep was a brand new steel whippersnipper and on a message written on the guard. To Porridge from 501. And I still have that whippersnipper. The Smithton Club was always an eventful place on a Wednesday night. At about 5:30, Dump would arrive to have a beer with his mates. He would enter the bar. Everyone had a nickname. He would start by saying, hello, Powidge, Sconzy, Wartnose, Scotty Boy. And if someone that didn't know was seated at the bar, and they would be bruv. The boys would acknowledge Dump. He had various nicknames as well. Colin Stephen, Mongrel Guts, Froth off the top, and Dump. The crew would arrive. Ross Britton, Neville Wells, Ken Marthick and the late Glenn Britton would call in for a few well-earned beverages. We all know how good Dump's hearing was, so he'd always sit furthest away on the western end of the bar. Lately, Dump had purchased some hearing aids, and I'm sure he would turn them down in the car park before entering the bar, just to add to the atmosphere. His standard order was a 6-ounce beer and a packet of blue chips. Stephen Goat Bride actually nicknamed him Blue Chips. He was always good for a stir, and I don't think he could wait till Wednesday afternoon to knock off to come to the club. If Dump was ahead with the banter, I would always bring up about the dairy with no door, and that'd knock him back a peg or two. I'm not sure whether he did forget to put the door in, but it was a good one to come back at him. Dump growled me and the committee at the club for getting rid of the cheese and biscuits. And it was about 6 years ago, but that was okay. He's only reminded me 312 times since. We all know how much Dump had love for trains and cats. He's always said he didn't have any cats. We know different. One night we was having a bit of banter across the bar. Dump was getting the upper hand, so I sung out across the bar, "Settle down, you train-loving, cat-loving big heap." And we all had a bit of a laugh. Then he turned to Ross Britton and asked him what I said. Many afternoons, someone went home with sore ribs and tears rolling down their cheeks from the jokes and stories told on the night. And this will be sadly missed around the club. Rest in peace, Colin Stephen, forever in our thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm, or Porridge. Dump had sneaking the club door of a Wednesday night. Push it open very slowly, so nobody hear. Walk up behind Brownie. Porridge! But anyway, thanks very much for that. Now I'd like to call on Maureen. Thanks, Maureen.
First of all, I'd just like to thank you all for being here today. And I know it's an unusual situation that we have at the minute, but please do the right thing and keep everyone safe. So I'd like to tell you about my life with Colin Stephen Jaeger, or as he'd say, me and Maureen. We were married on the 16th of February 1985. He took me and my kids as family. We had a few rocky times at the start, as all newly married people did, but we were second round, so we still had our rocky times. But I'm pleased to say we had a very smooth finish. We built the shack in 1986, and that was the best thing that ever happened. I can remember going down there one day when it was only just the walls up, and the farmers from Marrawar used to adjust their cows down there. We rocked up to the driveway, and here's a cow standing inside the shack with its head out the window. Dump said, "I hope it hasn't shit in there." Quite often we would stop at the pub on the way down. We'll just stop for 2 beers. Oh, well, no, I don't think so. Yeah, come on, let's just have 2 beers. Well, it'd probably be 222 later, back in the day, that we'd wend our way down to the shack. And when he'd get up the next morning, one thing I never saw with Dump was that he had a real bad hangover. He'd get up and he would just poof. That was his way of saying, "I think I had a bit much to drink." And he foofed quite a lot, I might add. I could probably stand here for a couple of days and tell you all the stories about what happened at the shack, but I know you've got better things to do, so I'll just move on a bit. He didn't used to plan very hard for Christmas. It was always, well, I'm too busy, I'll do it on Christmas Eve. And then off he'd go to the shops and buy, a gift or something. And one particular Christmas, he came home after me saying that I needed a new, would like a new putter for golf. He came home with a gift wrapped up about yay long. And I put it under the Christmas tree and I thought, maybe that's a new putter. Come Christmas Day, he took the long thing and gave me a parcel. It turned out he bought himself an air rifle. And my parcel was black underwear. It consisted of a bra, knickers, a suspender belt, and a petticoat or a slip. I said to him, I don't really like black underwear. He said, I do. I said, well, if you like it, you wear it and I'll have the rifle. And that basically was the story, part and parcel of our lives. As mentioned before about Anzac Day and how many, he only missed 3 times in the whole time that he played. I can't remember the first, but I know the second was when we were in Darwin, and the one was of this year. I blame Peter Benson for an episode one night because Dump would go and stay at the pub, and he came home quite chirpy and got to the lounge room door and said, how's the darling little wife? I said, I'm fine, thank you. He said, I think I better go to bed. I said, okay then. So off he went. And I had to turn the TV up because he was snoring that loud. And when I went to go to bed, I thought, I'm not going to even sleep in there. It smells like the pub. So he had a few of those moments, but anyway, that was he loved playing in the band, so I just said, okay. We had some trips to Melbourne to the football. I've never seen anybody tell the umpire off so much for somebody that didn't play football. And then we would often go dining, and we went this particular time to the Rialto at Menzies, into the formal dining room, and it happened to be Bastille Day. And they were bringing around wine. Dump says, where's the beer? And everybody was playing, being properly behaved except him. And when they bought the meal, of course it was silver service with the lids, and he was quite taken by the action of the waiters. We had one each. He comes home and tells them that we had a meal and they had tin lids on them. Our trip to America was really quite interesting because back in the day, those of our age would remember, I've forgotten what it's called now. Anyway, the army one where they had the, come on, somebody remind me, F Troop, okay? And while we were up in Washington State, which wasn't very far from the Canadian border, he decided that we'd go out to Ban, as they used to say, on F Troop. So we jumped on a train and out we went. And it was actually really quite interesting and beautiful. We went to Lake Louise and the chalet and everything, and it was really, really good. And on the way back, we stopped over at Hawaii for a couple of nights. Dump was the only person on Waikiki Beach in jeans and a long sleeve shirt. I'm not getting sunburnt for anybody. We then had a trip up the Simpson Desert, and which we crossed, and we came out at Dalhousie Springs. We were with Plute and Lois Cartledge at the time. Sadly, both of those have passed. And as I said, we were stopped at Dalhousie Springs and we were camping, and the next minute we heard, "I bet that's Dump Jaeger." And it was, I think his name was Bardenhagen from Scottsdale or Lilydale. He'd heard him laugh, so he came, and then we came around, and we couldn't believe that in the middle of the desert somebody would recognise his laugh. The last trip we had up that way was at we went to Karumba, because Dump wanted to go and ride on another train, didn't he? Anyway, after we left Karumba, we went to Mossman, stayed with some dear friends, Loretta and Doug McMullen. Dump said it was one of the best trips he'd ever had, because he was put to work because Loretta's brother had a fruit farm, and so they would cart the fruit to cans, and Dump ended up mending his cool room door and everything, so he really did enjoy that. But mind you, once the car's heading south, we're going home. And we were going past this town, or through, driving down the highway, and I said, "I think we should have some lunch." And he said, "Yeah, I will. I'll turn off in the next." Anyway, we goes to the place was bypassed, and when we got to the sign that says "Thanks for visiting," I said, "Has this car got indicators?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Has it got a brake?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why the bloody hell don't you use it?" "Oh, what?" "Oh, and then in the end, he ended up making a left-hand turn. And I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, that car in front turned off, so I thought I would." We had all the biggest arguments when we were travelling around together, because he wouldn't read the signs, and he got panicky if there was more than two cars on the road. So it was always, "I can't stop. There's somebody behind me." So anyway, those were fun days. When we got back from one of our holidays, I received a phone call, and it was from a girl looking for me. I was one of those women that made a mistake many years ago, and a lot of shame was put on it then, but I'm pleased to say the end result was more than pleasing. When I got off the phone, Dump said to me, I was a bit upset, and I said, "I don't know whether I can tell you." He said, "What do you mean you don't know who it is?" I said, "I know who it is, but I don't know how to tell you." Anyway, we spoke for a while, and then he said, "Well, you're not the first and you won't be the last." And I said, "Oh, okay, and I was still upset. And this is about, I don't know, half an hour, perhaps past. And he said to me, "I love you, you old bastard, and don't you forget it." I thought, how sweet is that? So having found my daughter, we ended up meeting up when we were passing through Wagga, because she was living there at the time with her husband in the army. So we had a good catch up, And her eldest daughter said to her later, "You know those people that came and visit Mum?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "We like them, don't we?" So he said, "Yeah, we do." So Martin ended up meeting and staying with her and going out to dinner with them. And they used to fight over who was going to hold his hand or sit on his lap or whatever. And he was Uncle Marty from Madagascar, so they were thrilled to bits to know that. We all went to Melbourne after that, met up prior to Christmas so we could meet Neil, Sue's husband. And we had a really enjoyable time. And when we came home, Dum said to me, "You know, that was better than Christmas." And I thought, well, that ticked all the boxes. He loved his kids. He spoke to Brendan every Sunday. There was a lot of swearing going on there, I tell you. But anyway, I can't do it like he does, Brendan. Diddy diddy donkins. Yeah. And I know he had a very strong work ethic. And he'd say to me, "I've got to go write up the swindle book tonight, you know, his day book." But I know jolly well he would never even think about doing a swindle. He was too honest. And I'd said to him one day about, could we do something round the house? He said, "A man's got to have a bloody day off." I said, "How come I'm the only person in town you say no to?" "Oh, well," he goes. He worked with and for some beautiful people, but he still loved to come home. He'd walk in there on a cold winter's night and say, "Oh, isn't it good to be home?" Didn't matter what I cooked, as long as it wasn't tripe or brains, and I did try him on brains one night. He said, "I can't eat them." But anyway, on Tuesday night, I made a cottage pie out of leftover mince. And when he finished it, he said, "That was bloody beautiful." I said, "It was only leftovers." He said, "I don't care, I'll eat that any day." The last time we spoke was on Wednesday afternoon, about 2:25. He was going to work. "I'm going up to Timmy's to pour off the boxing. I'll see you tonight." "Colin, I'm still waiting." My grandson Blair, when he was about 5, he'd worked out, because of our situation, that he had 2 grands, 2 pars, 1 ma and 1 dump. And boy, did he get that right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maureen. Excellent. I believe we now have some photo memories of Dump Story. Yeah, as you can see, dumping those photos there from a youngster to right through to his concreting days of just how popular he was. So I'd like to call on Jan to come forward for the committee. Thanks, Jan.
The committal. We are glad that Dump lived. We are glad we saw his face and felt the pressure of his hand. We cherish the memory of those words in deeds and character. We hold the memory of Dump's devoted family life, his concern and care, his vitality and involvement, especially in conversation, of his loyalty to his family and friends, his place in history. We cherish his friendship and most of all his love. We should resolve at moments like these that while we live, we will strive to make our living too of real worth and carry on Dump's goodness to others. In thoughts of work well done and a life well lived, we now leave Dump in peace. While thinking of him, let us leave this place in quietness of spirit, conscious of the things that really matter in life, and resolved to live this way toward each other. Rest in peace, my dear big brother.
Thanks, Jan. There are any family members who would like to now gather around the coffin and place any items in the coffin, you can do so now. Okay. To Maureen and all the Jaeger family, everyone in this room is certainly feeling for you today. I know I am. And to you and the Jaeger family, just thanks very much. It was an honour today, Dump. It's farewell from all of us, from your loving wife, your son, your family, your brother, your sister, and all your extended family, friends and mates. Goodbye, old mate. Rest easy. We will all miss you. Thank you.